This little piece of clay from the library's collections is packed full of information from 4,200 years ago.
For over 5,000 years, the ancient Sumerian tablets remained locked in fragments, half written, half lost, like broken signals from another world. We assumed they were myths, religious poetry, or early attempts at storytelling, but that long-held assumption has just collapsed. A highly advanced artificial intelligence system has stitched together more than 500,000 fragments into a single readable system. And what it reveals is something no historian or scholar ever told us. These texts don't just describe gods or legends. They describe structured divisions between people, advanced systems of knowledge, and even warnings that seem to reach into our future. But the most unsettling part is what it reveals about the very structure of the human race. A truth so powerful it challenges everything we thought we knew about our DNA. Let's dive in. Secrets locked in clay. For more than a century, thousands of ancient tablets were discovered from the ruins of Eridu and Nippur. And then, almost nothing happened. And that's strange, because these weren't ordinary artifacts. They were written in cuneiform, one of the oldest and least understood writing systems, dating back over 4,000 years, which made reading them almost impossible. A single symbol could change meaning depending on context. Some words had no direct modern equivalent, and even when experts could translate the signs, the grammar often didn't always make sense. So what happened? Generations of scholars spent entire careers trying to translate these tablets and still only managed fragments. Out of what is now estimated to be between 500,000 and 1 million tablets worldwide, less than 10% have ever been fully translated. The rest are still sitting in museum basements, in places like the British Museum and the Penn Museum. That means nearly 90% of this ancient record is still unread, not lost, just locked. And for nearly 100 years, that's how it stayed, until 2025. That's when advanced machine learning models, trained using thousands of cuneiform inscriptions, were finally released for researchers to use. But these systems didn't just translate line by line. They started doing something far more aggressive. They filled in missing symbols where the clay was broken. They predicted how sentences ended even when half the tablet was gone. And more importantly, they compared multiple dialects at once: Akkadian, Babylonian, Old Sumerian, cross-checking meanings across centuries of language. And that's when the shift happened, because when these fragments were finally read together, they didn't read like myths anymore. They read like records. The same sequences appeared again and again, across tablets found in different cities, written centuries apart, yet repeating with almost no variation, even after nearly 2,000 years. That's not how stories behave. Stories change. But these stayed fixed, like instructions. Lines describing procedures, not in poetic language, but in steps. The mixing of specific elements. Terms like tima, referring to essence or personality, combined with shiru, flesh and blood. Measured quantities mentioned alongside substances, almost as if humans were being designed according to specific needs. And it doesn't stop there. Some descriptions hinted at things that don't fit the time at all. References to controlled heat, to shaped materials, to processes that sound less like ancient ritual, and more like controlled production. The multi-species humans. One of the most terrifying details was this: the tablets never describe humanity as a single unified creation. Instead, they keep using different terms, carefully, repeatedly, almost as if each one is pointing to something specific, something deliberately separated from the rest. One of them was Lulu, often translated as man, but another term appears just as often: Sag-Giga, usually translated as the black-headed ones. For years, no one questioned it, but AI did. Because Giga doesn't just mean black in color. It can also mean burnt, dimmed, extinguished. And that changes everything. Because in the same texts, the divine beings are described with something called melamu, a radiant glow, a kind of presence or energy. So now the contrast becomes hard to ignore. Not black versus white, but glowing versus dimmed. Almost like humans weren't just created, they were reduced. Versions of something more, with that glow intentionally turned down. And that's just the beginning. Other phrases went even further. Those who do not multiply. Closed wombs. Beings described without the ability to reproduce at all. And these weren't random mentions. AI cross-referencing linked them to specific roles, assigned to places like the deep regions, often associated with labor zones, the Abzu, not temporary, not symbolic, permanent workers, designed that way, almost like disposable versions, created to work, and then disappear. And then there's another phrase, one that shows up in repeated sequences, clay of lower glow. And alongside it, the tablets list combinations, mixtures, almost like formulas, ratios of elements, references to clay, and something described as divine blood. Different batches, different compositions, which suggested the same story again. Not all humans were made the same way. Some had more of that divine element. Others had less. And the ones with less, they're described as weaker, more exposed to pain, more limited, not by accident, but by design. And then come the fragments that sound less like myth and more like error logs. A tablet describing multiple creations, one after another. A man who cannot control his body. A woman who cannot give birth. A figure with no sight at all placed into the system anyway, like faulty models, still useful for something. And one group stands out more than the rest, described as having a restless voice. At first, that sounds harmless, almost poetic, but it isn't, because this wasn't about noise. AI analysis linked this phrase to something very specific: high cognitive autonomy, the ability to think independently, to question, to move beyond assigned roles. And that made them a problem. So they weren't guided. They weren't adjusted. They were removed. Some lines even hinted at an attempt to erase what made them different, almost like resetting a system that had gone too far. But not all of them were contained. Some escaped, beyond the controlled region, into the outer lands, into the mountains. And those who made it out didn't come back. What's interesting is how closely this connects to later stories. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, there's a figure named Enkidu, a man who lives outside civilization, wild, untamed, not part of the structured world. He's often seen as primitive, but in this context, he looks very different. Not primitive, but outside the system. The first human upgrade. The early humans did exactly what they were made to do, but they didn't last. They couldn't reproduce. Every new human had to be created manually, shaped, processed, and placed into the system again and again. And the tablets made it clear, this wasn't a smooth operation. It was slow, it was exhausting, and it was starting to fail. Some of the texts, especially those linked to the Atrahasis tradition, described a growing problem. The labor demand kept increasing, but the method of creation couldn't keep up. There are even references to the lower gods, the ones assigned to manage the work, becoming overwhelmed, pushing back against the system itself. Because creating humans this way, one by one, wasn't sustainable. So a decision had to be made. And that's where Enki enters the picture again. Not just as a creator, but as someone willing to change the rules. The texts suggest he didn't just adjust the model. He altered it. Something new was introduced, something not present before, the ability to reproduce. But that wasn't the only change. This time, the human wasn't just shaped for labor. It was given something more. The first example of this appears in the figure of Adapa. Unlike the earlier versions, Adapa is not described as a worker. He's described as someone who understands, someone who speaks, reasons, and leads. The texts even suggest he could see what others could not, perceive things beyond the physical, almost like a new category entirely. But this change came with a limit. Adapa was given knowledge, but not full freedom. There's a moment in the tablets where he is summoned by a higher authority, the sky god Anu. He is offered something described as the food of life, a chance at immortality. But before he goes, Enki gives him a warning: do not accept it. So when the moment comes, Adapa refuses, and that decision changes everything, because what follows is not reward, but loss. Humanity keeps the ability to live, and now to reproduce, but it loses the chance to live forever. The God conflict. The tablets show a clear split between two forces, not just in authority, but in vision. On one side is Enki, on the other is Enlil. And what separates them isn't just personality. It's what they believe humans are supposed to be. Enki's position is expansion. In the texts, he is the one linked with teaching, with giving humans writing, agriculture, and astronomy. Not just tools for survival, but tools for understanding. But Enlil sees the opposite. To him, humanity is not evolving. It is becoming unstable. The tablets repeatedly describe his concern in one word: rigmu, usually translated as noise. But AI analysis suggests it doesn't mean a simple sound. It refers to disruption, competing signals, a breakdown of uniform control. In other words, humans are no longer acting as one system. They are becoming individual, and that breaks something in the structure. Enlil's response is control, restriction, order. And that difference creates a split not just in philosophy, but in geography. The texts show two different zones of influence. Enki's regions, often associated with Eridu, are described as places where humans are taught deeper knowledge. But Enlil's regions, especially tied to Nippur, focus on something very different: quotas, labor, punishment. Not development, but management. It starts to look like two different experiments running side by side, one pushing humans upward, one holding them in place. But the system doesn't stay balanced for long, because the conflict escalates into a decision that changes everything. Great flood. The texts describe Enlil reaching a breaking point, deciding that the system has failed beyond repair. Humanity is too noisy, too uncontrolled, too widespread, so a reset is ordered, a total wipe of the surface system. But not everyone agrees. Enki breaks the rule, and in that moment, one human is warned. Utnapishtim, also later reflected in the figure of Noah in other traditions. He is told to preserve not possessions, but seed, the essence of life. What follows is survival, but not equality, because after the flood, the structure changes again. Lifespans shorten dramatically. Records that once spoke of thousands of years collapse into centuries, then into ordinary human limits. And the tablets suggest this was not a natural decline. It was an adjustment, a controlled reduction, not to erase humanity, but to make sure it never grows beyond control again. The ancient high-tech. One of the most repeated concepts is the me. In Sumerian tradition, the me are described as objects, physical items that contain the knowledge of civilization. Not abstract ideas, but transferable units of capability. And in the story of Inanna and Enki, something strange happens. The me are taken and loaded, and once that happens, Inanna suddenly gains abilities instantly: weaving, leadership, warfare, metalwork, as if knowledge is not learned at all, but installed, almost like a system where skills can be deployed directly into a mind. Then, there is another term often translated as mu, usually understood as name or monument. But when AI compared hundreds of references, the meaning shifts. The mu is repeatedly described with a roaring voice, a sheath of fire, and movement that disturbs the ground below. The Era epic describes 7 terror weapons used to erase cities. The language becomes even more direct, a flash that leaves no shadow, people losing skin instantly, water becoming poisonous for generations. And that leads to a final layer in the texts, something that quietly explains how this system stayed in place. All of this advanced technology was never shared equally. It was divided into tiers. The lowest tier, humans given basic tools like the plow and hoe. Middle tier, priests and scribes given measuring systems and optical instruments. And above that, something reserved entirely for the ruling system, described as the gaze of the deep. AI links this to something that behaves like observation from above, continuous monitoring of regions, almost like a surveillance layer covering the entire system of Eden. Not everyone saw the same world, because not everyone had access to the same level of technology. And that's the key. This wasn't shared progress. It was structured control. But here is where it becomes even more serious. Because inside these tablets, it's not just the origin of humans, the divisions, or the advanced systems being described. The Sumerian warning. By this point, the tablets were no longer just describing origins or systems. They started describing something else entirely: observation. The Sumerians referred to planets as lubad, literally sheep that are watched. And that detail changed the entire picture. Because, according to AI analysis, they weren't just observing the sky casually. They were tracking patterns, orbital shifts, long cycles of motion. The heavens were described as shetir shame, the writing of the sky. Almost like the sky wasn't empty space. It was a system, a giant clock, where every eclipse, every alignment, every cycle was another step in something much larger turning in the background. And then a pattern emerges. Civilizations rise, expand, and collapse under what the tablets describe as cleanup. Some human types appear only in certain phases, used for construction and development, then removed when the system resets, like a permanent structure. Growth, expansion, reset, which leads to one final idea flagged in the analysis. Humanity is not described as one continuous line. It is a divided system. Some are called sheep, others are implied to be shepherds. And before each reset, there are signs of selection, a marking process, where survival is not equal. Some are carried forward, others are treated as temporary, placeholders in a larger cycle. And when the cycle ends, only a select structure remains. Everything else is cleared, which leaves a single question hanging over it all. If these patterns are real, then where exactly are we inside that cycle right now? And what comes next? What happens next? Ancient Sumer has always been the most mysterious civilization, puzzling both archaeologists and historians. How 5,000 years ago they were building organized cities, inventing writing from nothing, and setting rules of law, as if a complete civilization already existed. And the only real window we had into that world was clay tablets. Most of what came out of those translations looked ordinary: trade records, grain counts, daily transactions. It made the tablets seem purely administrative, nothing more. That raises some of the most uncomfortable questions. Was humanity always evolving randomly, or was it structured in a way we never fully understood? And if even part of this pattern is accurate, it also forces a different interpretation, not just of history, but of identity itself. Who are we? Why are we here? And whether this system belongs to the past, or whether we are still part of it without even realizing it. For the first time, AI is helping us look at our past, not as stories or myths, but as something that might have been far more real than we ever imagined. And it raises a serious thought. What we call human history today might just be a simplified version of something far more advanced and complex. And as this technology keeps improving, we're only going to find more. So, what do you think about all this? Let us know in the comments below. If you liked this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. And consider subscribing to the channel, because we'll be bringing you more stories like this very soon. Until then, see ya!